Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Glad to be with you on a solid Wednesday. Apologize a little bit about being a little late today. Usually the shows we've been doing on Wednesday are a little bit earlier, maybe kind of in the morning, which is trying a different time today, but it's the way it works out. Unfortunately, if you listened to the show last week, you'll know that I had some issues with my computer. Unfortunately, I had to lay it to rest over the weekend. And anybody that has lost a computer or has had a computer for a while, obviously you store a lot of different things on it and you kind of depend on it pretty much to access just about everything that it is that you access. And then you go through the process, making sure your files are saved and stuff like that. But I'm not going to bore you with stuff like that. If you had checked a little bit of what the show is about today, we got some different things we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the NBA draft lottery. We're obviously going to talk about handling New York, how I think it's just something that New Yorkers say to make it like they're just so superior to everybody else. Of, you know, how does somebody handle New York? That there's some people that can, there's some people that can't. Though I agree with some sentiments to it, I'm going to kind of, let it be known how I feel about the rest of it. And then obviously we're going to talk about some potential that we could have when it comes to Major League Baseball's first managerial firing. And obviously I'll talk a little bit about that in regards to how many different teams have changed managers over the last couple seasons. And I did a poll a couple weeks ago, who is most likely to be first amongst this year. And you're talking about two managers that are only in their second year as far as being Major League managers. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but obviously something that just kind of came through the news in regards to the New York Football Jets and the decision that was made to fire their general manager, Mike Maccagnin. And obviously there's a lot that's going to kind of stand in the way in the discussion about this topic, because the timing of it is very interesting. You had the decision that was made after the last off season with the coach losing his job and Todd Bowles, Maccagnin sticking around, and then you had free agency, you had the draft, all handled by Mike Maccagnin. So I do think there is a good amount of different things going on here, and the decision obviously could have been made to fire the general manager and allow whoever else it is that's bringing himself into the organization to cultivate the organization the way that they wanted. Bring in whatever players that they wanted through free agency, draft the way they wanted. So the only thing that I'll say about this is that I believe there is not enough information to say exactly what caused this to happen at this time and what exactly is the decision or the brain trust led obviously by the owner. And we know about the power that Adam Gase has within this organization. So we don't really know what is going to be best for this organization going forward. So I understand. I totally get why there's going to be sentiment from the fans. You're going to have fans that are pretty pissed off. You're going to have people that are upset. You're going to have people that are overreacting, because that's just what fans do. We know fan is the first part of fanatic, and we know it's going to be the most extreme opinion that is put out there. But I wouldn't overreact if I'm a Jets fan. Obviously, if y'all are and you're going to kind of, be overreactive to whatever they do, yeah, the timing of it's a little weird, but you do have your team that's set up for the year. Your head coach is there. Maybe he increased his power through the structure of that organization. Probably. But now who's going to be the next general manager? Is it going to be Joe Douglas out of Philadelphia, who has the relationship with Adam Gase? Obviously, with that will probably be a little bit of a co-general manager. Maybe the guy will, Douglas will have that title as general manager, but Adam Gase's power has kind of gone through and permeated through the Jets organization. But, the fans that are overreacting over this, yes, the timing is absolutely weird. You wouldn't expect it to be on May 15th. If the Jets' decision through Christopher Johnson and the ownership there was to move on from the GM, should have been done in February. Shouldn't really be done right now after you pretty much allowed Mike Maccagnin to bring in his series of free agents, allocate somewhat of that $100 million that they had in cap space, and hold off on dismissing him until right now. It is kind of a little bit weird. But moving on and kind of talking about what I wanted to bring up today. You had the NBA draft lottery, and obviously it doesn't just apply to New York Knicks fans. It applies to fans of just about any one of the 4 teams that I'm about to mention, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's Phoenix, whether it was the Chicago Bulls, because the NBA draft lottery and the word tanking, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit, is pretty much set up to benefit any one of 4 teams. And the 4 teams that were there that should have benefited a little bit more than they did were the New York Knicks, the Phoenix Suns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Chicago Bulls. And the way the draft lottery was set up is there was about a 14% chance that the Knicks could have gotten the number 1 overall pick. There was a 14% chance that the Cleveland Cavaliers would have gotten the number 1 overall pick. There was a 14% chance that the Phoenix Suns could have gotten the number 1 overall pick. And there was a 12.5% chance that the Chicago Bulls would have gotten the number 1 overall pick. And the reason that I appreciate what the NBA and Adam Silver, the commissioner, have done the most is because none of these 4 teams ended up getting the number 1 overall pick. The New Orleans Pelicans, and of course, in a weird situation with their star Anthony Davis wanting to be traded, will now have the benefit if they could somehow convince Davis to want to stay. Now, listen, the Pelicans are the employers of Anthony Davis. So, this star-driven league where you feel like the stars are the ones that have the say in what they do and where they end up, it only works up to a certain point, because right now the New Orleans Pelicans are the employer, and they have the power over the player. So Anthony Davis can hold out if he wants to, but then he could also not be paid by his employer. So there's a good chance that the New Orleans Pelicans will have both Zion Williamson, who obviously is the consensus number 1 overall pick. It would have been an absolute shock if a player other than Zion Williamson was selected by the New Orleans Pelicans. So you got Zion and you got Anthony Davis, and I think they're both, in regards to being guys on the glass and guys that impact the game from up front. Obviously know about Williamson and his ability to dunk and the skills that he does have. Neither of those players would be considered that prototypical NBA, guy that's going to bring the ball up, or the point guard, or the 1 or the 2. Now, I think the Pelicans can benefit, obviously, having Zion there with Anthony Davis, but the one thing that has to be brought up is that Davis's issue is the fact that he wants to win. I don't know if Zion Williamson is necessarily helping you win this year. That's why if the Knicks or the Cavs or maybe even the Phoenix Suns or even the Bulls, one of those 4 teams that we're going to call the tankers right now, before I get ready to kind of go off on tanking in the NBA and kind of enjoy the fact that none of those 4 teams got the number 1 overall pick. But before I do that, you do have to talk about Zion Williamson, who really would be that player to build your franchise around. The player that there really is no dispute over who the number 1 pick is going to be, regardless of what the team is that held on to the pick. The Lakers, who ended up getting the 4th pick, or the Vancouver Grizzlies, or Memphis, I'm sorry, I keep calling them Vancouver, but the Memphis Grizzlies, if they end up with the number 1 overall pick, they were taking Zion as well. But in a franchise like that, even if it was a team that was going to be a quick fix, like the Knicks, and the obsession of the fans and, of course, the media and the way things are breaking out with the salary cap, that potentially they may have an ability to bring in Kevin Durant, but not only that, but another max player. A guy like a Kawhi Leonard. A guy like I would like to see them get in Klay Thompson. Kyrie Irving, obviously being in the mix, and then many, many other players that are going to be free agents. Even if you wanted to go a Jimmy Butler-Root as your number 2 player, the Knicks have the cap space to be able to do it. And they'll benefit from having the opportunity to have a Zion Williamson had they had the number 1 overall pick. I don't think the Knicks necessarily are sitting bad at number 3, though. The consensus guy there is obviously R.J. Barrett out of Duke. Then you got Cam Reddick couple other players that are interesting based off of the needs of your organization. But I think the Knicks will have the ability to attack through free agency, and I don't think things are as bad for them as the fans may make it seem just because they didn't get that number 1 overall pick. But I'm happy to say that the Knicks, the Cavaliers, the Suns, the Bulls, any one of those teams that did anything to impact their play on the court and maybe diminish the results that they could have had by giving their best. If any one or all 4 of those teams are tanking, good for them. I'm glad none of them got the number 1 overall pick. It worked out. That tanking in the NBA, the way the lottery is set up, doesn't promise you anything. And that's great to know. And hopefully that's a lesson that's set up for all the other teams out there that are going to be bad teams in the National Basketball Association, teams that aren't going to be going anywhere, teams that are going to look at the 2019-2020 NBA season as an opportunity to let's win as few games as possible. Let's put the least talented roster together. Let's get absolutely no results, because at some point, once the season ends and you hit the draft lottery, we get an increased chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. How did that work for the Knicks? How did that work for the Cavaliers? How did that work for the Suns or the Bulls or any other team that thought a couple less wins over the course of the 2018-2019 NBA season was going to do anything for them? How did it work out? We understand that there was a chance. The lottery was set up, and you could say, hey, it's luck. The Pelicans lucked out. They got the number 1 overall pick. But they had a 6% chance based off of where they finished last year getting the number 1 overall pick, and they got it. The Memphis Grizzlies had a 6% chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. Ended up with a number 2 pick. The Knicks, the ball came out for them at number 3. Same chance. Probably there could have been 2 or could have been 1. They had a better chance of having a number 5 pick than any one of the top 4. So the message that tanking is sending to the rest of the NBA is you probably shouldn't do it. And teams, when you're looking for construction and you're looking for quality of rosters, should work a little bit harder to make sure that their teams are up with the best of the best. We could talk about this as being the Warriors' time, and it probably makes sense. The Golden State Warriors are set to possibly win their 4th NBA championship in the last 5 years. And I'd say right now, amongst the 4 teams that are still out there and available and have a chance to win a championship, probably have the best chance right now. But for those teams that are like, hey, we'll just win 14 games or win 16 games, it'll increase our chances to get the number 1 overall pick. I'm so glad that it's not the case in the NBA. And I do think other sports should follow suit. I think the NFL should set themselves up to have some sort of lottery. And I know it's not a popular thing, because when you're a fan of that team that's not going anywhere, when you're a fan of that team that is kind of going downhill and things aren't going right for you, you want some hope. You want the thought that at least you could get the best player or one of the best players in the draft for next year. And sometimes when a guy like Zion Williamson is out there, and this guy has been very much hyped, he's probably been the most hyped player coming out of college since LeBron James came out of high school, and probably the most hyped player coming out of college since, I don't know. I mean, you have to go back probably before that quite a while to see a player that was really looked at on everybody's radar saying, hey, if we ended up with a number 1 overall pick, we're going to get him. So the way that that's set up is now it entices teams that don't have a good outlook for a given season to say, hey, we'll just lose as many games as possible. And the more games we lose, the better opportunity we could get the top overall player. That top overall player is going to a team that finished in the middle of the pack last year. That top overall player is going to a team that, probably could have had some playoff aspirations. A couple things didn't go right. Obviously, Anthony Davis is frustrated there. He wants out. But the New Orleans Pelicans weren't the worst team in the NBA. And I'm glad to see teams that are not doing what they need to do. And obviously, to perform badly is nobody's aspirations to going into any given season, regardless of what sport we're talking about. But we are seeing it happen in baseball. Look at the Miami Marlins. Look at some of the teams like the Kansas City Royals and the Baltimore Orioles and the model that was set by the Houston Astros for sucking for so long. The model is set that if you take a back seat and you don't compete for a couple of years, maybe you have the ability to build through the draft. And it doesn't work in the NBA. And I'm so glad to see that it doesn't work in the NBA. And in fact, with all due respect to anybody that's a Knicks fan, I am a Cavaliers fan. If you look back at the poster back there, that it's got Mark Price and Brad Daugherty and the late Hot Rod Williams and, Larry Nance, the real original Larry Nance, Craig Elo, Terrell Brandon. Yeah, the fifth grade. That's where I go back for my Cleveland Cavaliers fanhood. And honestly, I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad that the fact that LeBron James chose to go to Los Angeles meant that the Cleveland Cavaliers could not put a competitive team on the basketball court this past year. I don't want them to get rewarded for that. I'm pretty pissed with what I saw on the court last year for Cleveland. And the same way you should feel if you're a Knicks fan. The same way you should feel if you're a Phoenix Suns or a Chicago Bulls fan. Those teams were not in NBA quality. They were not teams that were expected to do anything this year. So the fact that your front office has done a bad job to this point, perhaps there's some bad coaching, perhaps there's just some players that just aren't good enough to play on a winning team in the National Basketball Association. And if that was the case, should there really be some reward for that? Should you end up with a top pick just because your team was that bad? And once again, the part of it that bothers me is you could perform worse and that might increase your chances. I'm so glad that that's the case in the NBA. I'm so glad that the Knicks and the Cavaliers and the Suns and the Chicago Bulls, basically, for the exception of the Knicks, got the worst case possible. The Bulls could not finish with any worse than the 7th overall pick. The Suns could not have finished with anything worse than the 6th overall pick. The Cavaliers could not finish any worse than what they got as the number 5 overall pick. Or maybe they could have finished 6. Maybe the teams could have finished collectively a spot further than they did. But the bottom line is they're not 1, 2, 3, 4 because they were the 4 worst teams in the NBA. And I'm glad. Just a reminder that this copyright and broadcast is authorized under internet rights granted by the World Wide Web and is solely for entertainment of our audience. Any publication, reproduction, or other use of the pictures, descriptions, and accounts of this show without the express written consent of the Passball Show, JohnPielli.com, and John Pielli LLC is prohibited. Any commercial or other use of programs, such as by charging admission for its showing, is similarly prohibited. And as I'm saying that now, and I'm thinking of really one of the more underrated play-by-play guys and analyst, and a guy that did broadcasting, was involved in broadcasting for many years. And I'm thinking about Jerry Coleman right now, the former second baseman for the New York Yankees in the the late 1940s, early 1950s. And of course, he left us a handful of years back. Spent many, many years as a broadcaster for the San Diego Padres. Even managed their team for a season. I believe it was 1980 or 1981. Ended up going back in a broadcasting booth. One of the nicer guys, but also was a very good broadcaster. And he, along with Phil Rizzuto, at one point they were a double play combination for the New York Yankees. And they end up having success on their own. Now, Jerry Coleman isn't going to stand out as flashy or as known as, let's say, a Phil Rizzuto or some of the guys that were known for their own cliches and their own sayings. But Jerry Coleman, for a series of years, was very good at what he did. So as I do my disclaimer, I'm thinking of Jerry Coleman today. But moving on into the world of baseball, and there is a possibility, and we could find it over the course of the next week if we're looking at the records of the Washington Nationals and the New York Mets based off of the expectations that were set forth coming into this season. Both teams are not necessarily trending in the direction that they want to go right now. And whether this show that you're watching right now or listening to is time contingent in any way, shape, or form, neither of those teams are going to be up at the top of the National League. Neither of those teams are going to be up at the top of Major League Baseball when we're talking about the best performances for a little while. So the time sensitivity of this would probably need to go in a month of June or July. And either one of those or both of those teams would need to go on a very serious run to change the opinion of this host right now, as it sets off of the facts that have preceded it. So the Washington Nationals, where they sit in the standings, are probably the team that could make the first move. And the one thing that stands out in regards to managers, and you've heard me talk about this before, their powers have been stripped from them. They've basically been castrated in regards to their ability to do their job. Managers used to have this say in a lot more than they have say in right now. And I think that's one of the unfortunate points, because you're looking at it from a fan perspective. If you want, what is the first thing that you go to when you see a bad play on a field, or you see a bad move perceived by anybody that happens within a game? A pitcher comes in, he gives up a couple runs. A guy comes in a defensive switch or in a double switch, and that player doesn't perform. Or you put in somebody as a defensive replacement and the ball finds them, they make a key error, they end up losing a game. You want to put the blame on the manager. But we have to understand that the game has changed to a point that the managers are essentially given a list of guidelines, a lineup, a list of pitchers that are available, a list of what the matchups say in regards to what used to be referred to as the binder, but now is the Excel sheet or whatever is produced by the analytics staff. But they're still based, or their performance is based off of wins and losses. And you look at wins and losses, and when they're not what you expect, especially in Washington this year, especially in the Queen side of New York City this year for the New York Mets, you're going to have no choice but to blame one person and one person only, and that is the manager. And that's unfortunate, because that's not really the manager's fault, the hand that they've been dealt. Maybe there are some injuries, and you look at Washington and Trey Turner being out, Juan Soto being out for a little while, has certainly impacted that offensive team. Their bullpen is terrible. And you could say bullpen management has something to do with it, but how much does the manager control the management of a given bullpen? That's something that has to be asked. But all of this being put aside for what I will continue to go to with my narrative and stick up for Major League Baseball managers, it's not going to hide the fact that at some point, if things don't change in Washington or the Queen side of New York City, that there will be a change at some point this season. And Davey Martinez and Mickey Callaway are probably the most vulnerable Major League managers that sit in their current position on this day at this moment. So you're thinking, General Manager Mike Rizzo with the Washington Nationals. Obviously, if it was up to me, if I was the ownership of the Washington Nationals, the person that would be on the hot seat a little bit more would be Mike Rizzo. Mike Rizzo has gone through a ton of Major League Baseball managers over the last, half a decade to a decade. Starting with, Manny Acta, going to Jim Riggleman, to Davey Johnson, to Matt Williams, to Dusty Baker, and now to Davey Martinez. At some point, it's got to show that the Nationals are a better team that can just get to the first round of a given season, can win the NL East a year, but get eliminated in the first round. Obviously, under Mike Rizzo's tenure as the general manager, they have not gotten past that point. Now, obviously, he has a very good relationship with the Lerner family, the owners of the Washington Nationals. So his ability, or where he sits as far as being in the pecking order in regards to job security, at least at the moment, seems like it's okay. I haven't heard any reports that would say anything that would counteract that. I haven't heard anything that says that Mike Rizzo is at the risk of losing his job. That being said, something does have to happen relatively soon if the Washington Nationals are going to salvage their season. If they're at risk of going 10 games or more under 500, whether it's May or June at any point of the season, that's kind of looked at as a magic number where there should be some concern in regards to what the security of the job should be at people that are making key decisions in that organization. And now we understand that it's kind of an oxymoron when we're talking about key decisions that are had by a manager of a Major League Baseball franchise, because we know that manager doesn't have the power that they had before. And whether it's Davey Martinez's fault, whether it's Mickey Callaway's fault or not, which I'm stomping my foot down, saying that there's a loud no in regards to is it all their fault in regards to results of those particular franchises. We understand that when it comes to being a scapegoat, the easiest thing to pull outside of a hitting coach or a pitching coach is the plug on a team's given major league manager. Now, will that happen? Well, if things keep trending the way they are for the Washington Nationals, it probably will happen. And whether that's fair to Davey Martinez or not fair to Davey Martinez, he probably is going to be the first major league manager to go if the Washington Nationals don't start winning baseball games, and winning baseball games soon. So my question is, what is the best solution if you're the Washington Nationals, if that's the decision that you choose to make? You decide, if you're Mike Rizzo, that Davey Martinez is going to be shown the door, you're going to have to bring somebody in. Should you bring somebody off the coaching staff, or should you go outside the organization? The first guy you think about certainly is Joe Girardi. Now, Joe Girardi, you know that he's dying to get back in the seat. You know that he's probably just waiting for a solid offer or waiting to make a decision on a place that he wants to manage in. Now, you can't just go up to Joe Girardi and say, hey, I'm going to name you the manager. Joe's got to be okay with that. Joe has to have looked at the situation and see that this is a place that he does want to go and does want to continue his managerial career. Now, the other side of it, obviously, is the value of that major league manager that's going to want to have input. How much input has been taken away from Davey Martinez as opposed to his predecessor, Dusty Baker? Because I do think the modern day manager as opposed to the old school manager has something to do, or may have had something to do, with Dusty Baker being let go in Washington after he led that team to 2 straight NL East titles. Now, Davey Martinez may be more controllable, so you're going to go from a guy that is more controllable to a guy that may want some of his own control. So that's something you got to think of in regards to Joe Girardi, whether he's willing to accept that, whether he's not willing to accept that. I think those are major things that are going to either allow for you to bring in Girardi in a smooth transition in season, or may get in the way of that actual hire. But I look over in Queens, and I look at the guy that's sitting on a bench next to Mickey Callaway with the New York Mets, and I think it would be a very good hire if you're looking to get a little bit of a spark out of the Washington Nationals, to bring in Jim Riggleman. And I'm not talking about Riggleman taking over for Mickey Callaway like many Mets fans are wishing and praying that the Mets would pull the plug on Callaway and give the job to Jim Riggleman. Obviously, you're talking about the interim manager at one point of the Washington Nationals, but also the interim manager of the Seattle Mariners, the interim manager last year of the Cincinnati Reds. So this is a guy that has experience doing this and has gotten some results in these type of situations. He had success in Washington. In fact, a little bit of a rift between him and Mike Rizzo, a little bit of Jim Riggleman saying, you know what, I want a little bit of a contract extension. I want a little bit of security. I got this team that was going nowhere for a while under Manny Acta to a point where they're actually over 500. And listen, Mike Rizzo decided to call his bluff and say, listen, if you want to walk away, walk away. Jim Riggleman decided to do that. Didn't look good for him at the time. And I remember on the PBS talking about it years ago, when it was not necessarily the best move for Jim Riggleman. He may have never gotten another opportunity to be a manager again. Well, he got one in Cincinnati. He may get one if the Mets decide to fire Mickey Callaway. Honestly, if you're Mike Rizzo, you say, Riggleman's done this before. He's gotten a spark out of this organization before. You're obviously talking about probably nobody on the roster outside of Ryan Zimmerman that was there when Jim Riggleman was their manager to last. I think it would be a great hire for them. And also would probably take a little bit of pressure off of Mickey Callaway and the New York Mets. Mickey Callaway doesn't need to have the manager replacer on his coaching staff as a bench coach. Now, listen, Mickey and Jim Riggleman could get along pretty well. They could have a great working relationship. But do you really want to have somebody working next to you that has been known for taking managers' jobs in years past? Now, it might not be Riggleman's fault. It might be one of those things where he is trusted for his experience and the decision was made above him to replace the manager that's there. And who better to fill that role as the next manager on an interim basis than a guy that has experience before? Jim Riggleman, if he ends up managing his next team, whether it's the Mets or another team, will be the second manager in Major League Baseball history to actually be the manager of 6 teams. And I think just Jimmy Dykes was the only other manager to manage 6 teams. There's about 5 or 6 managers that have managed 5 teams, including Riggleman. But it'll be interesting to see if he's going to manage his 16th. Not to be all over the place, but Edwin Jackson, I'm looking forward to seeing him as a major league pitcher make his debut for the Toronto Blue Jays, the 14th Major League Baseball team that he would have played for at the major league level, which is outstanding. It hadn't been done before. Jackson is currently tied with Octavio Dotel for the most teams played for with 13. I can't wait to see him put that Blue Jays uniform on and play for team number 14. Listen, it'd be cool to see Riggleman get another job with a 16. But I think the best fit for him right now, if I'm the Washington Nationals, if I'm Mike Rizzo, to maybe say, hey, maybe I made a mistake a series of years ago and I didn't give you that extension. How about another chance to manage this team through the rest of the year? And if the Washington Nationals, who are 9 games under 500 at this moment, somehow turn it around, end up winning the NL East, end up getting a lot more than they've gotten to this point out of Jim Riggleman, you damn well right better give him a contract extension. You damn well right better make him the manager over the next series of years and give him a legitimate opportunity. Now, anybody in Washington, from that organization to the fans, would sign up for that in a heartbeat because things don't look too good right now. You're battling a couple injuries with Soto, having a hard time getting back, with Turner still out. Obviously don't have Bryce anymore. You got some damn good starting pitchers with Scherzer and Strasburg and Corbin, but outside of that, their pitching staff has been an absolute disaster. If they could somehow turn this around, you damn well better give whoever saves this team a contract extension. And I'd love to see it be Jim Riggleman. Just a reminder that this is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no brand produced by any other brewer that costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood aging produces a taste, the smoothness, and drinkability you'll find in no beer at any cost. So I wanted to bring this up again because this is another hot point on the Passball Show that I brought up a couple times. You got a region, which obviously being in this area, being from the metro area, New Yorkers will say, hey, you're not quite a New Yorker. You don't live in New York and you're not one of us. I don't really want to be. And there is this entitlement that exists amongst New York sports fans that, you know, sometimes make them seem like they are so superior to other fans. And once again, my point on this, you know, it only applies to New York fans. Nobody in Chicago says that New York fans are the most passionate in the country. Nobody in California says New York sports fans are the most passionate in the country. Nobody in Philadelphia or Boston or anywhere else says that, except for New Yorkers. So there's this perception that exists. And you could point to examples to basically back up any argument in this regard. There are players that have come to the city of New York. There are coaches that have come to the city of New York, and for whatever reason, the results didn't coincide with what their track records stated before they came here. So what do fans and people in the media say? It's usually one of those, well, they can't quite handle New York. And you've heard it time after time after time, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that method of argument because you could go anywhere and not succeed. You could be great in New York and then go to a city like Miami or Minnesota or Milwaukee or somewhere out in the Dakotas, and your game could be left behind. And I hear it brought up again when it comes to the PGA Championship, which is going to be this weekend, obviously, in New York. And how does that impact the golfers? If you're not a Tiger Woods, if you're not a Brooks Koepka, if you're somebody that, I don't know, may be a little vulnerable to people shouting obscenities or saying things to you that you may not like or making fun of you, does that mean that there's no way you could win the PGA Championship? And I kind of laugh when I hear that because it's not the actions of others that are going to determine whether an individual athlete succeeds. It's up to the athlete to perform. It's up to the athlete to go out there and do the best job that they can. They're at fault if they don't succeed. It's not because they couldn't handle the spotlight. It's because they performed poorly. And the same thing we say in team sports. It's not about the outside circumstances. It's almost like we try to make excuses for individual athletes and for teams for not succeeding. We say, hey, it can't possibly be them. Maybe it's the surrounding elements. Maybe it's the city of New York that just doesn't work for them. It's a bunch of hooey. It really is. It's a silly argument that gets put out there by, unfortunately, fans and people in the media that want to make excuses for players and athletes. It's on the individual player or the player that plays for a team to perform. And if they don't perform, it's on them. It's not the elements. It's not any other excuse you can make. Blame it on the player. And one of the things that always bothers me when it comes to the discussion of Major League Baseball managers or pro football coaches or NBA coaches, we try to pass the blame on or share the blame instead of putting it on where it belongs. A player or a player on a team, which makes the team. The individual players, the ones that are on the court, on the field, on the ice, those are the ones that should be held most accountable for the performance. Just a reminder that Castrol provides maximum protection against viscosity and thermal breakdown. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. A little bit of a recap of the show today. We started because the news of Mike Maccagnin being let go or shown the door with the New York Football Jets is pretty fresh within the last hour or so. So we spoke a little bit about that. I understand fans are going to be upset. Unfortunately, you don't know what the particular organization is doing. What led to this decision? It seems like maybe there was a little bit of a rift between Gase and GM Mike Maccagnin. The decision was make them let Maccagnin go, maybe giving Gase a little more power. And if you're a fan and any of this stuff bothers you, I understand it. I understand you being a little ticked off right now. But the Jets just had an off season where they had a good draft. They took Quinn Williams. They outside of that, made some pretty good picks through the course of their draft. Brought in Le'Veon Bell, brought in C.J. Mosley, made some positive additions to a team that obviously has Sam Darnold and is expected to succeed this year. So if the Jets have a good season, you can't say that Mike Maccagnin did a bad job. Now, over the past, 4 or 5 years or 3 or 4 years that he's been there, he doesn't have necessarily the best track record. Some of his drafts have not been very good. 2 years ago, he brought in Jamal Adams. Last year, he brought in Sam Darnold. This year, he got Quinn Williams. He's gotten top players in each one of the 3 NFL football drafts. Now, the question is going to be, are the Jets going to be good this year? And if they're good this year, is it enough to keep the momentum going that it'll be sustainable for the organization going forward? If the Jets end up being a top team in the NFL, get themselves to a Super Bowl within the next 3 or 4 years, some credit is going to have to go to Mike Maccagnin. Now, I know people are going to bash on Maccagnin, saying he should have been let go sooner, and maybe he should have been. There was a lot that happened with the Jets over the last series of years that would have made sense to let the general manager go. So that's not really the issue. The timing may be the issue. But if the Jets end up putting it together, and if the turning point of the franchise is over the last couple of years with Darnold coming in and the signing of Le'Veon Bell and Quinn Williams being drafted with the 3rd overall pick in his past year's draft, you're going to have to give some credit to Mike Maccagnin. And even though Mike Maccagnin is no longer employed for the New York Football Jets, he's had a say in the construction of this roster to this point. And I don't think Adam Gase or the guy or Joe Douglas that could come from the Philadelphia Eagles worked with Gase with the Chicago Bears. If all of a sudden this team starts winning, you better remember how you got there. Because Maccagnin is a guy that's been pretty much picked on by the New York media and New York sports fans over the last series of years. He's responsible for this roster that's been put together here. And I don't think the Jets, from now until the start of the 2019 pro football season, are going to change that much in regards to the construction of this roster. This is Maccagnin's team. And if the Jets succeed from here forward, he deserves some credit. Spoke about the NBA draft lottery and how happy I am for teams like the New York Knicks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Phoenix Suns, and the Chicago Bulls for not getting that number 1 overall pick. proving that tanking in the NBA is not a good idea. And you know what? If you're the next Knicks or Cavaliers or Suns or Bulls, teams that you don't think have the best chance to go forward, maybe they should invest a little more in their team. Maybe they should make a move that may make them a little bit better sooner as opposed to later, because you can't bank on getting a top overall pick. And if other sports like pro football, like hockey, like Major League Baseball, they do a little more to make it a lottery type of system, I'm in favor of it. Because you know what? You should have a reward for not winning games. You should not have a reward for not trying. You should not have a reward for not putting the best product you can on a field, a court, or an ice, and expect to get better just for having a worse record in a respective sport. And I'd love to see a change in baseball. I'd love to see the Baltimore Orioles have the worst record in Major League Baseball this season in 2019 and not have it guaranteed that they're going to get the number 1 overall pick. We spoke about Davey Martinez in Washington, and I'd love to see Jim Riggleman get another shot there. I think it'll be, something that over the last couple of years, you're trying to figure out what's not working right for the Washington Nationals. No more Bryce Harper. Trey Turner's hurt. Soto's hurt. The bullpen is terrible. The pitching staff sucks, for the exception of Scherzer and Strasburg and Patrick Corbin. They've had some problems. Now, is it Davey Martinez's fault? No, but he's the prime scapegoat there. Just like the Mets don't straighten up, it's not Mickey Callaway's fault exactly, but he's the prime scapegoat. And you would expect to see, either in Washington or in the Queens side of New York City, those to be the first two, or one of the two be the first managerial casualty in all of Major League Baseball. I'd like to see Jim Riggleman get a chance, but a chance that is a little bit more powerful than just being the interim. If he leads the team to mediocrity, then he probably shouldn't come back. But if he turns one of these franchises around and gets them into the playoffs, then he should get himself a quality contract extension and should be a real Major League manager, not a bench coach or an interim coach. So that's what we spoke about on the Past Ball Show today. We'll be up on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, the whole thing. Do want to thank everybody for tuning in. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.